Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to panel 2. Given the focus of our summit and the particular role of the EDPS, today on this panel we aim to deepen our discussion on the role of data protection with respect to state actions. And as you know, the EDPS is supervising more than 70 European Union institutions, bodies, offices and agencies representing the full spectrum of EU public administration. We actively engage with them on a daily basis by responding to their queries, conducting investigations or audits, and through outreach initiatives such as the EDPS DPO network. Here in the EU, the law mandates that public authorities follow the same or similar data protection rules as private entities, extending this to law enforcement as well. And the rationale is obviously that the state's potential for privacy intrusion, which has historically been the impetus for data protection laws, should not be underestimated and thus should be governed by equivalent data protection principles and obligations. My name is Thomas Zerdig. I am working in the EDPS as the head of unit for supervision and enforcement. And I'd like to ask all of us today, what have we learned from the approach? Is data protection effectively curbing the EU's public administration data collection practices? Do these laws sufficiently address the unique powers and societal functions of the EU public administration? And additionally, with the recent advances in database interoperability across the EU, are current data protection laws adequately capturing these developments? With me today are 4 distinguished individuals on the panel and online from 4 different EU agencies and bodies, each with a unique expertise on the subject matter. We have online with us Ms. Agnes Diallo, who is the Executive Director of the EU Agency for the Operational Management of Large-Scale IT Systems in the area of freedom, security and justice, or in short, EU LISA. She has over 20 years of experience supporting government-level institutions and private sector organizations in France and across Europe in the areas of digital identity, data protection, security, as well as business transformation, and Agnes joined EU LISA in 2023. To my left, we have Ms. Diana Alonso Blas, who is the Data Protection Officer and Head of the Data Protection Office at the EU Agency for Criminal Justice Cooperation, in short, Eurojust. Before Eurojust, she has worked at the Interdisciplinary Center for Law and Information Technology at the KU Leuven, the Belgian and Dutch data protection authorities, and the European Commission. Further to my left, we have Mr. Hans Leijtens, who is the Executive Director of the European Border and Coast Guard Agency, Frontex. He serves since the 1st of March 2023. And before that, Hans has held positions as Commander of the Royal Netherlands Marechaussee and Governor of The Hague, and at the Dutch Ministry of the Interior and Kingdom Relations, he has worked in several leading positions at the highest management level. And then to my very left, we have Ms. Anu Talus, who is the chair of the European Data Protection Board, EDPB, which is an independent EU body set up by the General Data Protection Regulation. Anu has served as the Finnish Information Commissioner since autumn 2020. And before that, she worked as the Deputy Information Commissioner, and she also served as Senior Advisor at the Ministry of Justice for over 10 years. So I'd like to turn to Agnes online. Welcome, it's great to have you with us. And let me begin by asking, starting from the discussion that every public administration in a democratic society including, of course, an EU public administration, needs to meet the citizens' expectations as to understanding what it does and checking if this EU public administration fulfills its mission lawfully and effectively. In data protection, and in particular with the data protection rules applicable to EU public administrations, the EU institutions are subject to regulations like the GDPR alongside national bodies, reflecting high standards across all the levels without huge differentiation. However, the specific roles and broader implications of EU actions sometimes leads to call for even stricter regulations for EU bodies. So my question to you, Agnes, is, should the EU public administration be subject to higher standards compared to national administrations? And how do you and how does EU-LISA see your role in this context, and what do you do in practice?
Thank you, Thomas, and a good morning to all of you. It's my pleasure to join you for such a topical question that, as you mentioned, is of the essence for what we do. As you underscored, I'm the executive director of EU-LISA. So our mission with EU-LISA is that we take care of what we call the digital backbone of the Schengen space. In short, some of you may know the agency. I would bet that most of you don't. And that comes with no surprise, because our work is very much related to cybersecurity and to elements of confidence in the way we handle the matters we take care of. However, anytime you cross a border, anytime you travel outside the Schengen space, then you would be using a service from EU-LISA. And we take care of the databases and the systems that are absolutely core to judicial cooperation, to police cooperation, to the work that border guards do in the Schengen space, and beyond that, to the ability that member states have to share information and to ensure that the value of that information, that data, is available to all of the member states in a well-controlled and a well-protected manner for our stakeholders. And so, as you can imagine, as we build those bridges, that connection between those different databases that we call interoperability, and which is in fact one of the signature approaches to databases for the Schengen space of Europe relative to other geographies. As we build those systems and connect them, the flow of data and how that is handled is obviously, and the data privacy that we put around it is obviously a very important element. And so at EU-LISA, anything we do is founded on our legal mandate. And in fact, all of these systems are based on a legal mandate that itself incorporates notions of data privacy in full accordance with the GDPR and in fact, the data protection body. Most precisely, there is a DPO that's fully on board, and the agency has a requirement to provide sufficient resources for the DPO to work. And through the work of the DPO and their team, we are also subject to a number of requirements. In particular, anytime there is a change request, for example, or anytime there is a new evolution in the system, we have to do a change management assessment of what that would mean in terms of data privacy. When we develop a new system, which is the case right now, we're starting to build the new Eurodac, which is a system that is core to the Pact on Asylum and Migration that maybe you have heard about in the past weeks, that will relay the foundation for the asylum and migration policy of the EU space. Core to that pact is a new system that's called Eurodac, and we're starting to build it. Whenever we start to build such a system, the first thing we do is we do a data protection impact assessment. Now, if I come back to your question as to whether, comparing that to national standards, whether from an EU perspective it should be reinforced, I would most likely stand clear of comparing, those two levels. But my conviction as a leader of one operational agency within the EU institutions is that because we are entrusted with absolutely precious information from people, from citizens, and we are entrusted with the ability to take the value of that information, we have to comply to this strict framework. Why? Because that is how we are able to develop trust. It's on the foundation that we take care of the data in a way that's compliant with the legal framework and really remaining within the remit of that legal framework, that we are able to comply or elicit the notion that the citizens can entrust us with their data. And on this basis, then we can serve our stakeholders and serve the missions that the EU institutions are asking from us.
Great. Thank you, Agnes, for that. And let me catch you there. You mentioned it already. You mentioned what you're doing is the digital backbone in the Schengen space. And you mentioned, of course, this increasing interconnection of databases, which we have within and among EU member states, with EU institutions, bodies, offices, and agencies. And obviously, that means we have personal data flows which flow from the European Union institutions, bodies, offices, and agencies to the member states, or even to private entities within the European Economic Area, and vice versa. That obviously presents opportunities, but also challenges. For example, data sharing can enhance the fulfillment of any public administration's mission. Improving cross-border cooperation is certainly fantastic. Efficiency gains can be had, but it also raises deep concerns about privacy and data protection. Agnes, if you could tell us briefly, what are the main challenges arising from this and these developments for EU-LISA?
Of course, I think you started to elicit to and to allude to many of those. In fact, we are a little bit like the one walking a tightrope. You know, we're trying to balance these two elements and that tension. Where on the one hand, it's easy to understand the opportunity and the value that you would bring through the ability to share the depth of data that each member state has, and how allowing for information flow across member state can enhance the ability for policemen, for border guards to work, but also simply for each one of us, right? So one of the systems that we take care of is called eCodex. And through eCodex, what is actually happening is that, assume you're a citizen living in Spain and you are selling, textiles, for example, and you have a contract with somebody that's in Austria, and that person, touch wood, does not pay the bill that they owe you, right? Because those two countries have different judicial systems, if you were not to use the eCodex abilities, right, for judicial systems to collaborate, then it would be very difficult for that citizen to actually get justice and to be paid their rightly billed, right? What they should be paid for the service that they render. That's one very typical example of, or very, understandable example of the value that as mere citizens, each one of us can get from this cooperation. But as you mentioned, on the other hand, right, it's how do we make sure that the services are well encapsulated and well controlled and well taken care of? Back to my point earlier on the notion of trust. And the way we do that is, in fact, we rely very heavily, again, on the legal foundation. Any system that we are entrusted with, any system that we develop or that we operate, relies on a legal foundation that clearly states out what's to be done in terms of data protection, what's to be done in terms of access to the data, who has the right, and what is the, usually on a needs-based approach that each of the stakeholders should have around the data. And so, to give you one example, as EU-LISA, despite the fact that we actually build those databases and connect them, we don't have, by default, an authorization to access and to work on that data. Only for the purposes of maintaining, for example, the databases, might we request an access to that data. And so really making sure that we remain within the boundaries, within the remit of our legal framework, but also that we comply with the scrutinizing authority, whether EDPS, whether other scrutinizing authority within the EU institution, are we able to walk this fine balance between bringing the value of data sharing, of information flow, and at the same time, making sure we uphold the value of trust by protecting data privacy?
Great. Thanks, Agnes. And I think I won't let you off the hook. I'll be asking you now to our overarching question in the panel. Is data protection suitable for public authorities? Because we know data protection laws are designed to apply uniformly to both public and private sectors, but the state, of course, has unique powers in societal functions. And at the same time, there's a lot of discretion and responsibility given to the EU public administration. And in light of data protection concepts, which we all know, such as accountability, risk-based approach, impact assessments, transfer impact assessments. So, Agnes, let me ask you, what's your take on this? Are current data protection regulations adequately equipped to govern this complex and evolving functions, which you, I think, described so aptly? Are these laws doing what they're supposed to do? Are they falling short? Do they excel? Is there too little detail, or is there too much detail? Please let us have your views on that.
Yeah, I think I most likely already gave you some hints on my own position, right? I think as EU institutions, as public and very operational institutions, we have a duty towards the public. We have a duty towards the EU citizens, and we have a duty towards those who entrust that data to us. So my firm conviction is that we need, it's not that it's suitable. In fact, we need that frame so that the notion of trust, that is the foundation of, let's say, the social contract that we have with our stakeholders and with the EU citizens, is actually upheld. Now, then it's all about how we walk the fine line, right? And how we make sure that there isn't a notion of neither under-regulation nor over-regulation. Neither a notion that, you know, the implementation or the legal framework into which we operate is made so complex, so difficult, so demanding, that there is this notion that, you know, the extra step is not bringing the value that we expect from it, but is actually preventing us as operators to fulfill our missions. And that is, the devil is in the detail. And that is most likely one area where it's important for us to be working with partakers like EDPS, right? Like yourselves, to be able to provide the feedback, to work also where there are gaps in the legislation, to, through the operationalization of that legislation, make sure that we find the right balance, again, to sustain this notion of trust. That's the building block for me of the social compact that we have there.
Okay, thank you very much, Agnes. So no wish list to the legislators, but pragmatic cooperation, including Absolutely. With the EDPS. Great. Now, there is an opportunity for questions to Agnes. Is there anybody in the audience who has a question to her at this stage? I don't see. And if that's the same for our online audience, then what I'm left with, Agnes, is to say thank you very much for your presence in the EDPS European Data Protection Summit, and have a great day.
Thank you
and
so
we will
much.
continue here with the panel to ask the same questions. Thank you, Agnes.
Thank you
have
for
a great
having
day.
me, and I wish you a great rest of the summit. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So that brings us to our next speaker on the panel. Diana, same questions to you about public administration and the expectations in a democratic society. Should EU public administrations be subject to higher standards compared to national administrations? And how do you see your specific role in this context, and maybe that of Eurojust? And what do you do in practice? Thank you. It should be on. Go ahead.
Okay, should be ongoing. Thank you. Okay, let me start by, of course, congratulating the EDPS first on the 20th anniversary. I hesitate to say this or not, but I was already working 10 years on data protection when the EDPS was created. That means everybody starts calculating my age. I was very, very young when I started working. But it has been indeed my pleasure to meet the different EDPS supervisors through the years, and I want to thank particularly Wojciech for this invitation today, which I appreciate very much. I'm here representing the perspective of the data protection officer. So I'm also representing my friends and colleagues of the DPO network who are sitting here as well. And I think it's important to take into account that perspective. As a good lawyer, I have to say everything I say is my own personal opinion, not necessarily the official position of Eurojust. But if we go to the questions you ask, should we have stricter rules for EU public administrations? I mean, if I look at the situation at Eurojust, I would say that we clearly have stricter rules than other EU bodies. And I'm not talking about EULISA or Frontex, who also have a quite a specific regime, but more the general EU DPR and so forth. We have the EU DPR, the Chapter 9, we have the Eurojust regulation, we have the specific data protection rules. And I would say this is logic because of the nature of the data we are processing, and also because, even more importantly, the possible impact of this processing for data subjects. This is all about people. This is not just about data. So we are talking about data on ongoing investigations and prosecutions. So it is logical that the level of protection has to be higher than if we are talking about food safety or something more general. So, and I also think that the EU administration has to lead by example. We have a role there. However, I will not say that that means that we should have a higher level of protection than the national public administrations. And I think the main point here is that we need to have a common level playing field. We work as Eurojust within a system of the judicial cooperation at EU level. And we experience in practice, and I will come back to this maybe a bit later, that although we do have the law enforcement directive, which should have a harmonized perspective with the rest, the application at national level is not equally the same. And therefore, sometimes we encounter this kind of problem. If we are talking about what we do at Eurojust, well, as data protection officer, my role is to ensure compliance in an independent manner, easier said than done, of course. We invest in a number of specific elements, particularly on awareness, which I think is a key element in any organization. And it keeps striking me through the years that people coming even from very high level positions at national level often know nothing about data protection. So this is like a basic thing you need to start by training every person that comes in, regardless of the level of this person. We advise on a lot of issues as to technology and as to legal developments. This means, for instance, our new case management system, the famous war crimes database that we are building. And if you read the book, you will find a chapter on this particular topic. Also, we deal, of course, with complaints, data subjects requests, and so forth, which are also very important. And I think at Eurojust, we take accountability very seriously. As I said, every single staff member is trained, and we have worked a lot in building awareness and building a data protection culture. We take it on board from the beginning to the end of every process, and I will not say we are perfect, but let's say, I always say that for us, Data Protection Day is not once a year, it is every day, and we are really working on it because, well, the issue of trust has been mentioned many times, but in our case it's clear. We do not start our own cases. Our cases come because judicial authorities bring them to us. So if they would not trust us with their files with extremely sensitive data, well, it would be meaningless. So it is really very important for us.
Thank you, Diana. That indeed means you're at the core of operational exchanges between member states to and from, and you're coordinating that in Eurojust. So what's your take on this trend to interconnect databases at all levels in the EU, between member states, between EU institutions? What's your take on this? Where do you see the challenges? Because you're actually working in that environment every day.
Well, I would say I see quite a lot of challenges there, and data protection is just maybe a small piece of the puzzle. I'm going to mention a few practical challenges if we are talking about interoperability. I would say the first challenge for us is maybe a legislative one. If we look at the legal basis of the founding acts of the different institutions, and we cooperate with Europol, we cooperate with EPPO, the Public Prosecution Office, we cooperate with Frontex, of course, with EULISA, with OLAF. There are not the same provisions in each one of the founding acts as to how we should or we should not exchange data with each other. Sometimes it is mentioned hit, no hit, sometimes it is not. So let's say the wording is different. Even when we are talking about the same exchange from both sides, we don't have the same wording. And I would say it would be very good to have a much more clear legal basis at EU level for this kind of exchanges. And the second challenge is more technical. We have different technical solutions applied in every institution. So let's say we have now a system with Europol, which is working using one technical solution. We have a system with EPPO, which went live very recently using another technical solution. We will have quite soon, hopefully, the ECRIS TCN issue, again with a different technical solution. So this becomes quite difficult in practice. But I would say last but not least, the most difficult issue for us is linked to the so-called ownership principle. At Eurojust, the data we receive comes from the national authorities. It is not our data, it is their data, which means that even when we have a potential hit, we always need to go back to them. And this is really like a manual process. You have to go back to the judicial authority to verify first whether this link is a real link, because they have the whole background that maybe it looks like it is, but it is not. But secondly, we need to get from them the permission as to whether we may share or not with the other institution that we have this link. So it is really quite a time-consuming exercise. And I would say it's not really very efficient. And also we have a certain agreed time frame with every other institution, which means that if we do not receive an answer at all or not on time, well, then we will have to tell, let's say we have not results. So I don't think there is so much a data protection issue, but I would think the legislator could probably do a better job in ensuring a bit more of an efficient system there.
Okay, thank you, Diana. So that's a clear wish list to the legislator on even the challenges and technicalities. But let's now zoom in on data protection. And given your long experience, share with us, please, on the question which we're trying to address: is data protection law suitable for public authorities in your specific context? Are there specific issues where you'd say, yeah, we need to do better, or it's perfect and it's fine, it's just technical problems which we need to solve?
Okay, well, I would say, generally speaking, the data protection laws are suitable. If we talk about Eurojust, as I said, we have a very extensive system. We have the general rules. We have the specific rules of Eurojust, which are lex specialis. And to be honest, I think what we have is certainly detailed enough. We don't need more, but we also don't need less. And I say this clearly because I know in many discussions at EU level, it has been argued that maybe, well, the EU DPR should be sufficient. We should just stick to that. We did at the time a very clear analysis of that, and we concluded, and I remember my president went to Commissioner Jourova with this file in his hands, that if we were to do that, we would have very serious gaps in the real situation. And I think this would not lead to legal certainty and would create a lot of trouble. So I think we need data protection rules to be clear and detailed. And I think we certainly need to have a higher standard of data protection, as I said at the beginning, than other institutions who are not processing the same type of very sensitive information as we do. However, I will not say everything is perfect, and I will give you a flavor of a couple of issues which I think could still be tackled. There is one point I mentioned already at the beginning, which is the lack of harmonized application of the data protection rules at national level. And in our case, I'm talking about the Law Enforcement Directive. And let me just be very concrete and give you an example. I'm talking about the transfers to third countries. I know there was a report of the Commission about the Law Enforcement Directive, and there it was clearly said that there is not an application of the rules at national level regarding the need to carry out an assessment for appropriate safeguards before transfers take place. And our experience is that national judicial authorities keep sending data to third countries where there is no appropriate safeguards. Sometimes it's on the basis of an all agreement that exists for many years, most of them without any data protection clauses, or sometimes even on the basis of reciprocity. This is a very old principle in the judicial system. I'm not trying to imply that the judicial authorities should not be able to send this information, but the question is on which kind of safeguards and how do we ensure that we are not making this choice. And I go back to what was said in the earlier panel. Do we have data protection and do we have security? Do we have judicial protection? Do we have security? No, we should have judicial protection and we should have personal data protection at the same time, and it is possible. So I think we need to ensure that also at national level, the judicial authorities are applying these rules in the correct way, because otherwise we end up always with the same situation. We have at Eurojust, as the EDPS knows very well, because they have audited us on this specific point, a very elaborate system for evaluating transfers to third countries. We evaluate each one. If there is no cooperation agreement, if there is no adequacy decision, we carry out a data protection assessment, we have a decision taken, documented, etc. And then we tell this to the national authorities and say, well, but here we can do it. It's not a problem. So let's say, in principle, we should be able to count on these same standards, because actually the chapter of the Law Enforcement Directive on this topic is very, very similar to the Eurojust rules. So there should not be this difference in practice. And I know this would require, for having a better application in practice, a joint action. I think the Commission has a role to play. The data protection authorities have also a role to play, and I know the EDPB has put in place guidelines on this issue of transfers, which I welcome very much. But I think we would need to do more in terms of awareness and in terms of concrete actions with the judicial authorities. The other point is more linked to maybe the lack of decisions of the Commission regarding adequacy. So we have, for the law enforcement sector, one, which is about the UK. And since the Lisbon Treaty, as I think everybody knows, we are not able to negotiate our own cooperation agreements anymore. So we are again in the hands of the Commission to do that. And if there is no adequacy decision and there is no international agreement, well, the only thing we can do is to carry out this assessment. And if the conclusion is that there are no safeguards, we can still transfer on the basis of derogation, which is legal, but I will not say is very good from the data protection viewpoint. And this morning, Giovanni was already mentioned. I remember Giovanni was always saying it has to be not only legal, but also ethically correct. And I think here is where we need to look for solutions that are not only legally on the letter of the law, but also offer the right protection to data subjects. So this would be something that I think would be improved. I will skip some of my notes because I know you have more time, but just one wish for the EDPS, because I know you also asked me what could the EDPS do better. And I will just give you the perspective of the DPO from that side. I think if I speak on behalf maybe of some other DPOs as well, I think what we need is a more direct and informal dialogue with the DPOs on their daily life issues, not a consultation with a reference number and a few weeks to wait. No, we work on real life. We get questions, we need to give answers. We cannot tell our stakeholders to wait. So I think it would be good to have a closer dialogue in a real-time manner. And I mean, I know your Secretary General said yesterday at the meeting of the DPOs are part of the success of the EDPS, but also the EDPS is part of our success. So we do need to work together, and that would be my core message. Thank you. Thank you very much, Diana. Very clear, and I think a very good approach. That brings me to our next speaker, Hans. I'm going to ask you the same things, the same questions on your
appreciation your take on EU public administration, higher standards, yes or no? And what's your role in this context? What's the role of Frontex? And tell us what you do, please.
Well, thank you, Thomas, for asking these questions, and thank you for the invitation, being a bit of the elephant in the room, I guess, and also for not being a lawyer but a social scientist. So perhaps that might give you already a hint on where I'm going in my answer. I think, first of all, Frontex, looking at this regulation, is supposed to support member states with their external borders, the European external borders. We also operate in third countries. That can be, well, within Europe and even beyond. We do this by facilitating regular border crossings and trying to prevent irregular border crossings, and also we return those migrants who do not need our protection after the asylum procedure, of course. And I think it's important to talk about standards to at least, well, again, from my perspective, both from Frontex and as a social scientist, it's not only about legality. And indeed, I think Diana already mentioned it. It's also about legitimacy and trust. And actually, I'm more of a believer of the latter two than of the first one, because, well, if you don't have the right mindset, if you don't really believe in legislation, you will not use it the way it is intended. And I think that means that if you talk about frameworks and standards, of course, we need legislation for sure. And not only as a starting point, but also as a marker, and also to enforce. But I also believe in professional standards, and that's something on top of legal standards. And last but not least, and indeed Diana said it, ethical standards. So that means that we shouldn't only invest in legislation, but also in how we can implement and use it in practice. Because my officers, we are supposed to have 10,000 in 2027 in the field, need to know, understand, and need to be enabled to act accordingly. And let me be frank, being a law enforcement agency without, by the way, investigative powers, is not that easy in a culture, European culture, if I can speak about it, I think, because right now we have, well, a sort of patchwork of policing cultures in Europe yet. And I think, indeed, we have an obligation, I think, and we should also take pride of creating that European standard. And again, not only in legislation, but also in professional practices and moral compasses that are very important in practice, because in 99 of the 100%, the officer, the colleague, is standing there, well, alone or with one other colleague, and he has to do the right thing. He has to, she has to. So I think on one hand, I'm very proud to lead this endeavor, because it is, really it is, because we do not share the same standards everywhere. But I wouldn't say we need to have higher standards. We should need to have the highest standards. And again, you can write books about it, you can talk about it, but you need to bring it in practice. And for me, that means that yes, we need to comply with European standards, with global standards. Do we succeed 100%? No, we don't. Will we ever? I dream about it. Is that realistic? Perhaps not, but we have to strive for that. On top of that, we need to train, we need to exercise, we have to implement professional standards, and we have to invest a lot into the culture of policing, of border guarding in Europe. Because again, it's my conviction that the key is not only in having the right legislation, but also to raise awareness and to make it not something, I listening to the commissioner, I found it a bit of a false dilemma created by saying, well, there's security and there's justice. No. It's security and justice. It's justice and security. You can't sort of divide it. You can't present them as opposites. If we do, we sort of make the officer in the field sort of having to choose. No. It needs to be so. Justice needs to be in the core of in the heart of every single officer. And again, I'm perhaps a bit of a dreamer, but I think that should be what we need to do. Make sure that, of course, he or she is not tempted to do different than it was meant in the legislation, but also help him or her, support him or her in doing the right thing. And that has to do with leadership on top of legislation, on top of training, on top of exercising, whatever. And for me, this sort of presenting effectiveness next to fundamental rights is the wrong paradigm. It's the wrong paradigm. We can't be effective without having fundamental rights, every single one of them, in the core of our performance. And I just one anecdote from my election. I was questioned by the management board, so that's the member states and the Commission. And there was one question sort of suggesting why not sort of put fundamental rights apart for a while, because we have this geopolitical instability and Mr. Lukashenko pushing. Okay, but if we would do this, Mr. Lukashenko wins, because he's not testing our border system, he's testing our values. So if we would sort of deal with it like, okay, let's keep practical, let's invest in being more effective and ignoring the fundamental rights, which for me are at the core of our European values and the boundaries. So I think for me that it's not so much the opposition between the two of them, but then the trying to keep them together. And perhaps I can also talk about the challenges, because for sure.
I was going to come exactly to this, to
right.
bring this mindset to the challenges, for example, on interconnecting databases.
Yeah, the main challenges are, I think, two, or perhaps three. It's very complex. Again, you're lawyers, but I'm not. It's very complex. Imagine standing at the border somewhere in Bulgaria or wherever, and you don't have your phone. Well, you have a phone, your network doesn't work, and you have to sort of consider everything you need to do. And again, I'm not fighting the standards, but you need to do it. You have to bring it in practice. If there's a way to make it more simple, and of course that's also my job, to give clear instructions that are easy to understand, that can be followed without having to reflect on legislation and read to laws and etc. So that's one thing, the complexity, and it's becoming more complex also because we are indeed working on the crossroad between national legislation and European legislation and global legislation too. Second thing is in how we process, how we react to recent developments, we are way too slow. Not only in fighting human smuggling, but also in facilitating regular border crossings, because indeed industry is running and we are taking baby steps. And the time it takes for us as the community, the European, in this case, data protection community, it takes us way too long how to sort of digest what is happening in the real world and how to help us standing at the border doing the right thing. And the third thing is we are missing friends in data protection. What I mean by that is that I feel a bit left alone. Just do what the law says and do the right thing. And then we are scrutinized, of course, and I like it. Please keep on being that mirror to us. But for any advice, please, it would be helpful if we could have a bit more help from EDPS and EDPS community. I'm very happy with a very well-equipped DPO, the officer herself and the office in terms of what they know. And of course, I need to invest more in them. She needs to have more capacity because it's becoming huge, but it's taking too long. Internally within Frontex, but also in how we engage with the authorities. And the last but not least is trust. Trust is at the basis. If you consider me to be the bad guy, and I need to prove to you that I'm the good guy, okay, then I start with sort of a negative bank account. On the other hand, I cannot expect you to trust me just like that. I have to prove it on a daily basis. And it's not me in Warsaw, in the headquarters. No, it's the officer doing the actual work, wearing my uniform. And if he or she fails, I understand that's difficult for you to trust us as an institution. And then last but not least, the framework. I think the framework actually expresses our collective will. So I'm not fighting the framework. The framework is the framework. It's something we agree about, something that makes sense. So I think for me, it's more about, let's say, how to use the framework in practice. And again, we might need some help on this. And also, again, this trust, most of us, we take an oath or we do a promise when we enter into service. And that promise is to serve and protect. And it's not the same to protect as EDPS perhaps means, but it also has to do with our mindset. I think most of us, perhaps almost of us, wake up every morning to do the right thing. And are we successful in that 100%? No, we're not. We make mistakes, also in data protection. But at least I hope that being here, the elephant in the room, expressing how our sort of attitude is in this, we need your trust. Because without the trust, we have no legitimacy, and it doesn't make any sense then talk about legislation and about professional standards if we are illegitimate in terms of having your trust agency.
Hans, thank you very much. I think a very clear call for doing the right thing in practice with a bit of help from the Data Protection Friends, which also so I'm turning now to the Data Protection Friends. Anu, same question to you, obviously. What's your take as chair? What's your take on higher standards for EU public administrations? Is there the trust? What's your role? And what do you do to make this happen?
Well, thank you, Thomas. To start with, I think it's important to underline that the law is law, regardless of if you are private or a public entity. So the GDPR, like the EU DPR, sets some basic rights. It's about giving the information for the data subject. It's about giving the information how your data is being processed and for what purposes, what data is being collected. It is about giving the control for the individuals, for the data subjects. And this is an approach which is universal, regardless of whether you are public or private organization. Then, as an EU body, we are subject to the EU DPR, of course. And as a public authority, and in particular, given our role in the implementation of the GDPR, we are very keen on leading by example. So there are some key principles which needs to be always taken into consideration when processing of personal data. And we have created, for example, we have developed a specific privacy statement. And this privacy statement, it's always tailored based on the type of processing at hand. And it contains information, for example, of the data which we are processing, on the purposes of the processing, the types of data which is collected, and of course also the data subject's rights. And we do have the DPO team within the EDPB Secretariat. Like I believe that most of in this audience is really well aware of. The EU DPR sets the requirements in Article 43 to have the data protection officers. So as the chair, I cooperate very closely with our DPO. It is my responsibility that the processing of personal data within the EDPB takes place within the set requirements, and we are of course setting a lot of weight to set an example and to implement. We strive to implement the recommendations, our own recommendations. So basically this means to have enough resources for the DPOs, to provide the possibilities to refresh the knowledge, to provide the possibilities to maintain the knowledge and to be able to educate themselves within this field. Also, promoting the DPO's role internally is very important in this respect, as well as the appropriate separation of between the duties of the DPO and the organization.
Yes. Thank you, Anu, for that. So let's also go from your perspective on what you experience in day-to-day, in your daily exchanges with national authorities. How do you see this trend on data sharing? Are there challenges specifically for you in the EDPB? Should data protection laws evolve somewhat, or is the framework fine? And as you've heard from the other panelists, is there something where you say, nah, something is missing here, we need to have more, or is there something too much? Do you have a wish list on all of this? Please.
Well, we do have a wish list which we sent to Commission some time ago. So this is, but this might be a little bit different issue, a little bit different topic. Well, if you take a look at the regulatory framework we have now, we have we have quite robust regulatory framework which has now been on place for 6 years, and I think that it has shown to work. There have been many goals which are met. Of course, there are still work to do, but then taking a look on a more practical level, at the EDPB, we process personal data to fulfill our tasks. So we might exchange information with our members, and also our members exchange information between themselves, for example, when we have the cross-border cooperation. But the processing of personal data is not our core business. So we are not directly involved with the interconnection of databases containing biometric data or criminal records. When it comes to the IT services, with us, like with the other EU institutions and bodies, the IT services are provided through the SLAs with the European Commission and the European Parliament. And also with the EDPS, we do have the Memorandum of Understanding, because the EDPS provides for the Secretariat of the EDPB. And I think that this is an excellent opportunity to thank for the really good cooperation we have had ever since we started this journey together. So there is also more informal interaction and cooperation. There are the DPO cooperation. The DPOs meet regularly to exchange and to exchange views, and there is the network for the data protection officers, which is a platform for this. And this is, of course, I think that this has also came up several times now in this panel. This is a key element to implement, to put in place the data protection legislation in public bodies. So this is very important for us.
Okay, no, thank you, absolutely. I think the DPOs in particular, they make data protection work in every day. Thank you so much. I think we've heard some very practical insights from all of you, including from Agnes. I know it's difficult shortly before the lunch break, but there is, of course, room for a question. So if there was a question from the audience to one of our panelists, this is the moment. It's difficult to see, and I don't see any. The lunch hunger is too big. So since online, neither questions, then it's with great pleasure. Thank you very much again for participating. And please give a hand to our excellent panelists. Thank you.